We are taught that power flows from the ballot box. We are taught that every 4 years we stand in a booth, cast a vote, and decide the direction of our civilization. We argue about red versus blue. We debate policies. We think the man behind the podium is the man in charge. But while you are watching the political theatre, a different kind of election happens every single day. It doesn't happen in a voting booth. It happens in a server room in Wenatchee, Washington. It happens in glass towers in Manhattan. And in this election, you don't get a vote. There is a force that is quietly designing your future. It decides which companies survive and which ones go bankrupt. It decides if your rent goes up. It decides if your car engine is gas or electric. It decides what values your children are taught in advertisements. This isn't a conspiracy theory. It is a corporate structure. If you walk into a grocery store and buy a Pepsi, you think you're supporting Pepsi. If you buy a Coke, you think you're supporting a competitor. But look at the shareholder list. Who owns Pepsi? The top shareholders are Vanguard, BlackRock, and State Street. Who owns Coke? Vanguard, BlackRock, and State Street. You want to book a vacation? Expedia or TripAdvisor. Both owned by the same people. You want to bank? JP Morgan or Citigroup. Owned by the same people. You want to fly? American Airlines or United. Owned by the same people. We call them the Big Three: BlackRock, Vanguard, State Street. Together they control nearly $25 trillion in assets. That is more than the GDP of the United States. It is more than the GDP of China. If these three companies were a single country, they would be the second largest economy on Earth. And effectively, they are a single country. They vote together, they move together, and they have designed a system where no matter what you buy, no matter who you vote for, and no matter where you live, money flows back to them. But among these three, there is one that stands above the rest. One that doesn't just manage money, but manages the government itself. Its name is BlackRock, and its CEO, Larry Fink, has admitted openly what the goal is. He didn't call it democracy. He said, you have to force behaviors. Today, we are going to rewind the clock. We are going to look at the last time a corporation became more powerful than a government, and we are going to expose the hidden software, the artificial brain, that BlackRock is using to turn the entire global economy into a company town. To understand what BlackRock is, you have to understand what it is copying. History tells us that corporations are businesses and governments are rulers. But history also tells us that this line is a lie. In the year 1600, a group of merchants in London formed a venture called the Governor and Company of Merchants of London Trading into the East Indies. We know it as the British East India Company. At first, it was just a trading firm. It bought spices, it shipped tea, but as it grew, it realized that trading was risky. Pirates, local kings, and fluctuating prices threatened profits. So, the company stopped asking for permission and started taking control. They built their own army. At its peak, the East India Company had an army of 260,000 men, twice the size of the British Royal Army. They minted their own currency. They collected their own taxes. They didn't just trade with India, they owned India. They were a corporate state. They answered only to their shareholders, yet they ruled over millions of people who had no say in their governance. They could starve a region to save a profit margin. They could start a war to open a trade route. The East India Company eventually collapsed because it was inefficient. It relied on soldiers, muskets, and wooden ships. It was slow. BlackRock is the East India Company 2.0, but it has learned from the past. It doesn't need an army of soldiers because it has an army of capital. It doesn't need to conquer a nation with guns. It conquers it with debt. It doesn't need to install a governor. It just buys the debt of the sovereign government and dictates the terms. Think about the Ukraine reconstruction. Who is meeting with Zelensky to coordinate the investment for rebuilding the country? BlackRock. Think about the US national debt. Who buys the treasury bonds that keep the lights on in Washington? The funds managed by BlackRock. They have achieved what the East India Company could only dream of. They have become the fourth branch of government, unelected, unaccountable. And unlike the Supreme Court or the President, they cannot be impeached. But how did they do it? How did a company founded in 1988, less than 40 years ago, surpass institutions that have existed for centuries? They didn't do it with luck. They did it with a weapon that sits on a server farm, analyzing the world 24 hours a day. They call it Aladdin. If you ask a Wall Street trader what BlackRock is, they won't tell you it's an asset manager. They will tell you it's a technology company. In the early days, Larry Fink, the founder of BlackRock, lost $90 million in a single quarter at his old job. He was humiliated. He realized that human beings are bad at risk. We are emotional. We are short-sighted. So, when he started BlackRock, he didn't just hire traders. He built a machine. He called it the Asset, Liability, Debt and Derivative Investment Network, or Aladdin. Aladdin is not just a piece of software like Excel. It is a central nervous system for the global economy. It monitors every stock, every bond, every currency trade, every shift in inflation, and every political event in real time. But here is the scary part. BlackRock doesn't just keep Aladdin for itself. They rent it out. Vanguard uses Aladdin. State Street uses Aladdin. The massive pension funds of California and Japan use Aladdin. Apple, Microsoft, and Google's corporate treasuries are managed through systems linked to Aladdin. Even the competition runs on BlackRock's brain. By 2020, it was estimated that Aladdin was monitoring $21.6 trillion in assets. Today, that number is likely far higher. This means that a single algorithm is risk assessing a massive chunk of the world's wealth. It creates a monoculture in the markets. If Aladdin says sell, everyone sells. If Aladdin says buy, everyone buys. It is a self-fulfilling prophecy machine. But the true power of Aladdin was revealed in 2008. When the financial crisis hit, Wall Street was on fire. Lehman Brothers was collapsing. The banks didn't trust each other. Nobody knew what anything was worth. The US government, the Treasury, and the Federal Reserve were flying blind. They didn't have the data to understand the crash. So, who did they call? They didn't call the CIA. They didn't call the FBI. They called Larry Fink. The Federal Reserve hired BlackRock to manage the toxic assets of Bear Stearns and AIG. They handed the keys of the bailout to a private company. They created vehicles called Maiden Lane, funded by tax dollars, but managed by BlackRock. Fast forward to 2020. The pandemic. The market crashes again. Who does the Fed call? BlackRock. The Federal Reserve hired BlackRock to manage its corporate bond buying program. The Fed printed the money, and BlackRock decided which corporate bonds to buy. Think about the conflict of interest. BlackRock is the largest shareholder in the very corporations that the Fed was bailing out, and BlackRock was the one managing the bailout. In 2020, BlackRock became the state. They were no longer just participants in the market, they were the plumbing of the market. This is the Aladdin loop. The government relies on BlackRock's software to understand the economy. BlackRock uses that access to position itself. The government asks BlackRock to fix the crisis. BlackRock becomes bigger. But total financial control wasn't enough. Controlling the money is boring. Larry Fink wanted to control the culture. In 2000, Larry Fink sent a letter to the CEOs of the world's largest companies. It was titled A Sense of Purpose. In it, he wrote, "To prosper over time, every company must not only deliver financial performance, but also show how it makes a positive contribution to society." It sounds nice. Who doesn't want a positive contribution? But in corporate speak, this was a threat. This was the birth of ESG, environmental, social, and governance scores. ESG is a credit score for companies, but it doesn't measure if a company is profitable. It measures if a company is compliant with the political goals of the asset managers. Does your company have the right number of diversity hires? Do you have the right carbon footprint? Do you support the right social causes? If you don't, BlackRock, which owns 8% or 9% of your stock, can punish you. They can vote against your board of directors. They can restrict your access to capital. They can tank your stock price. Larry Fink was explicit about this. He said, "Behaviors are going to have to change, and if you don't change, we are not going to invest in you." This is how you get go woke, go broke. You look at these companies, Disney, Bud Light, Target, and you wonder, why are they alienating their customers? Why are they pushing messages that half the country hates? Don't they want to make money? The answer is, they don't care about you, the customer. They care about Larry, the shareholder. If a CEO has to choose between losing 5% of their customers or losing their ESG rating and thus their capital backing from BlackRock, They will choose the ESG rating every time. The system is designed to bypass democracy. If you want to pass a Green New Deal law in Congress, you have to debate it. You have to get votes. It's hard. But if BlackRock simply says, "We will not lend money to oil companies unless they pivot to wind power," the law is passed instantly without a single vote being cast. This is why they are the architects. They have designed a system where cultural changes are enforced through the plumbing of the financial system. And now they are coming for the final asset. They are coming for your house. You've seen the headlines, BlackRock is buying all the houses. They deny it. They say, "No, we don't buy individual houses." And technically, they are telling the truth. BlackRock doesn't buy the house. They just fund the companies that do. They are major shareholders in the companies that are building build-to-rent communities. They are the capital behind the transformation of the American housing market into a rental market. Why? Because a subscription model is better for their portfolio than an ownership model. If you own your house, you have equity, you have freedom. If you rent from a BlackRock-funded corporation, you are a permanent revenue stream. It is the serfdom pattern again. But this time, the Lord of the Manor is an algorithm named Aladdin. So, who owns BlackRock? If you look at the shareholders of BlackRock, the top holder is Vanguard. And who owns Vanguard? Vanguard is unique. It is a mutual company. It is owned by its own funds, which means it is owned by the people who invest in it. This creates a perfect circle of anonymity. The snake eats its own tail. There is no single Dr. Evil sitting in a chair. There is just a structure that vacuums up the world's assets and concentrates decision-making power into the hands of a few dozen executives. We are moving toward a world where competition is an illusion. When you walk down the cereal aisle, you see 50 brands, but they are owned by 2 companies, and those 2 companies are owned by the big 3. When you look at the media, you see 100 channels, but they are owned by 5 conglomerates, and those 5 are owned by the big 3. It is a trust in the old Rockefeller sense, but it is so big, so complex, and so boring that nobody notices. They have designed a system you can never escape because they own the exit doors. You can't boycott them. If you take your money out of the bank is owned by them. If you put it in crypto, they are launching Bitcoin ETFs. If you buy gold, they manage the gold ETFs. They have captured the board game. So, what is the end game? The end game is the company town on a global scale, a world where the boundaries between the state and the corporation are completely erased, a world where your citizenship is less important than your ESG score. It is a world where efficiency is prioritized over freedom. But every system has a breaking point. The East India Company ruled the world for a century, until it didn't. It became too arrogant, it squeezed the people too hard, and eventually, the very governments that enabled it were forced to dismantle it. We are seeing the cracks. States like Texas and Florida are pulling billions of dollars out of BlackRock due to their ESG policies. Consumers are waking up to the illusion of choice. The BlackRock plan relies on you staying asleep. It relies on you thinking that the economy is just the weather, something that just happens to you. But the economy isn't the weather, it's a machine, and it has operators. The first step to breaking the machine is seeing who is pulling the levers. You didn't vote for Larry Fink, you didn't vote for Aladdin, but every single day you are living in the world they designed. The question is, are you going to keep renting your future from them, or are you going to take it back? Subscribe, because next week we are going to talk about the one asset they can't confiscate.